Let's get round 2 rolling.
Here we go, round 2.
Here we go, round 2. All right. Back with Paul from Practical Defense Solutions. You have a lot of experience with church security, both in
Some
the
experience, yeah. I guess a lot is relative. Yeah, a lot compared to who?
I would say more than most in our local security industry.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that's fair. I've done a little bit of house of worship security. We've both done a little bit of consulting with that kind of stuff. I want to get your take on church security. Why is it important? Why should a house of worship invest in a security team?
I think first and foremost, because people there that are there to worship deserve to be safe. Not that they get to shirk the responsibility of participating in that. But having been in some powerful worship services myself, really the only way that you can get into a space where you're really deeply in prayer, singing, either listening to a lecture or giving a sermon, the only way you can really do that, I think, is to feel like you're secure and there is a perimeter. So I think that answers your question of why generally should a church have it. And I think of it as a ministry. And we specifically with the teams that I've worked with, tend to use the term safety team or safety ministry more than security. And there's probably a lot of reasons to that aren't that important, that nuance. But I would say that it lends the opportunity for the pastor not to have that on his mind, or the other staff, the other people participating in the worship service, the other people, the people on the prayer team know that somebody is watching the door and somebody is, positioned nearby, that if they feel uncomfortable or someone did have a random outburst or began to attack someone, that a member then could step in and begin to mitigate that.
Yeah, I think that is a question that I get a lot is why do people have security? And I think that pretty much sums it up, is it allows whoever the client is to engage in their activity fully.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in a church setting, that's whatever you want to call all of the activities around worship, or service to their community, to their congregation.
Right, because it's
or
the same
to
thing.
People that are new to that space.
Yeah, because it's not just worship services, right? It's whatever
Absolutely.
the church might be.
Yeah, whatever activities, whatever outreaches they're involved in. Yeah, I believe that a safety ministry should be involved, from the outset, generally in every activity that the church participates in, or any member of the staff is participating in. There should be an awareness, if not a physical presence all the time.
I think it's really interesting that you describe it as a ministry, because I don't think a lot of people think about it that way.
It's absolutely a ministry. With the team of volunteers that I've worked with, even at the paid locations that I've been at. So I've been paid to work at a church. Almost always, we're working in conjunction with the volunteers who are already there. It doesn't matter what that church or house of worship calls it. Their usher team, their welcoming team, their greeter team, whatever that is for them. The parking team can be an integral part to a safety ministry. But I do that ministry, again, as instructors, we use words very intentionally, or we try to.
Mm-hmm.
That ministry part, I never want the guys that I'm working with or helping, whether that's in a paid capacity, a consulting capacity, or simply myself as a volunteer, I never want people to forget that we are there for a mission that's bigger than us. And yes, we may be dealing in the physical realm at that time, but that also doesn't that doesn't remove us from also engaging in spiritual battle, if that's what's called for. I hope that each of the volunteers that we've worked with, and especially in an area where there is a team, our team members are taking the opportunity to have conversations, even especially with people that other volunteers may not be quick to engage with because of their appearance, because of how they're acting, how they're talking. I would much rather our team be the work their way over there and see what they can do to minister to that person while considering the congregation's safety needs, than simply saying I'm on the security team. So I think that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to some people that you describe the ushers as part of a safety or security apparatus. Some people would have different ideas about that. When you think security, a lot of people think big jacked dudes standing by the door ready to hop on an active shooter or something like that. So, but
it's unfortunate if your church has big jack dudes sitting on stools everywhere. In fairness, I've seen videos, seen photos, been to a few places that you could kind of pick out people. If you've ever been to a club, you kind of know what a bouncer looks like and how they walk. Maybe not necessarily their physical features. I mean, sometimes, but the way that they kind of stand or sit on a chair in a position, usually an elevated position or a position of dominance within the room. I'm not saying you shouldn't do any of that, but integrating other service teams, other ministry teams within, or letting them see themselves as part of the safety ministry is super important, because those people can blend in a bit more. I think that guys like you and I, it doesn't matter what we're doing, or how we try and blend with our clothing and things, almost always, because kind of my head's kind of constantly swiveling and I'm just clocking other behavior. It would be easy for someone to spot you and I as being a part of the safety team, but I think a massively critical part to any safety ministry is to have females. There are times where a female is able to go and begin a conversation that simply just because of their presence and their appearance is not nearly as escalating as if you and I walk up and ask about what's going on.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's a hugely important thing to think about, because I think, again, a lot of people think about security as men and physically capable, dealing with the worst possible threat, but that's not reality.
It's not what you're going to be doing 99% of the time.
Yeah,
you do need to be preparing for that worst case scenario, and you need to have capabilities for that, and you need yes, there are preparations around that. However, you need to recognize that there's going to be a lot of things that you're going to do in the security industry, whether that's as a professional or in a safety ministry, that is not those 1% activities.
Yeah. So I know we've had a lot of conversations about this, but I think a lot of safety ministries become super firearms focused.
Unfortunately,
yeah. Again, that's a hot take from a firearms instructor over here. Why would you say unfortunately?
From a firearms instructor, the most important part about your safety ministry isn't if everyone's carrying a gun. Hot take. For the teams that I've been a part of leading, or that I've consulted with, or even just people that I've engaged or talked with that work, that are at another congregation that I haven't directly been helping, but we've had students ask us, what about my church? Over the years, we kind of, my brother and I kind of sat down and tried our very best to kind of outline the most likely emergencies that a safety ministry is going to be able to assist with, or should be prepared to assist with. and I believe there were like 7 to 10, the last of them being active shooting. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't have capable men and women in the room able to do deadly violence to someone who came into there to hurt you. You should. But it is initially more important, and it is still not the highest priority every Sunday. You need to be prepared for children who get lost or people who are ill, weather that is adverse, parking lot conditions that are, that need to be dealt with. And that's why, again, like using that term safety ministry, I want the guys on the team I'm working on and that I'm trying to help to see kind of everything as their role. Like, a church could get by without a safety team. I would say it's hard for a church to get by without coffee in the morning. If I can teach and let the volunteers who are making the coffee see themselves as a part of the safety ministry, great. If I can bring the greeters, and because they're the people like shaking hands at the front door on the way in and on the way out, like they're looking people in the eye, they're opening up to them, or just like a casual, a few words back and forth to someone can be enough to sense if something's off, or does someone else need to get involved? Do we need to continuously monitor a situation? Your parking team. One, like the parking lot is the most common area that an issue at a house of worship will be.
Whether that's slip, trip, falls.
Absolutely.
Altercation. Of
Yeah,
some type.
harassment, graffiti, yeah, any number of things. But car accidents, things like that. But or at least at the churches I've been a part of, we see the parking ministry as the first line in the safety ministry. Now, I understand that not every volunteer is comfortable with that role, but I try my best, especially the leadership there or the guys that I talk with. I want them to see that they have a role. They're the outermost perimeter. They're the first person that a bad guy would bump into. And so they need to be taking people's temperature. And if they sense that something's off, even if they're not comfortable getting involved, they are empowered enough to get on the radio and say, hey, I need someone to take a look at, this person and give a description. If they can do that, they've done their job.
Yeah.
Same way, if a greeter then, if that person, subject is now passing through the parking lot, the next person they're going to encounter is a greeter at the door that opens the door for them and asks how their morning is, or, hey, it's really good to see you. And if that person's like avoiding eye contact, carrying an odd-shaped bag, is dressed inappropriately, looks like they're disguising some of their features, like, okay, then we really need to be, getting the rest of the team and the rest of the planning involved. But like those two positions, and then like if you kind of think about the flow in a church, the next person they're in contact with is, if you're like us, I needed my caffeine on the way in, so the next people who would see or assess how you're acting, like what your mannerisms are, is the coffee team. And then the next person would be the ushers, and you may not need help finding a seat, but they're inside the sanctuary as you come in. They're seeing, what seat did you pick out, or were you looking for someone else in your group? If they seated you, where did they seat you? If they, and again, that how did you respond to their questions or to their, to their direction? Maybe an opportunity for that team to again say, hey, I think someone needs to get involved and be monitoring this more closely, or I think we need to begin steering a person towards a particular seat, whatever. But there is intentionality behind other people who are serving in the church, whether that's on the paid staff or on the volunteer side. They need to see themselves as an integral part to the safety ministry, because it is everyone's responsibility. Just like it's everyone's responsibility. I mean, we would say that any of our students who came into the congregation, even if they're just there to worship, they should have had their awareness up.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, they should know where especially if that's your church, you should know where all the emergency exits are. Even if it's like down the hallway through the office and out the back door, you should have at one point driven your car around the building, or could have pictured, or during an activity at some other time you were using another part of the building, check that out.
Yeah.
Or your bathroom trip or whatever that is.
Yeah, you should be able to tell me where the nearest fire extinguisher is at.
Yeah.
For the AED.
Yeah, I regularly test our volunteers. Be like, hey, if we had to go grab an extinguisher right now, where would it be? It's. I wouldn't say that every volunteering at a non-denominational church that is multiple campuses across an entire county. I couldn't say that I could tell you every single location, but I can tell you that I know where the maps to our campuses are and that they're all marked.
Mm-hmm.
And I could tell you that if I went down a certain direction, where I would be looking to spot it along the way. If I'm responding to what I think is a fire, I know where some likely places I could pick up equipment on the way.
And if you're at a building for a day, you're going to show up early and familiarize yourself.
Absolutely,
this
yeah.
is where everything is.
Really good example is we were working a security detail on Christmas Eve at a church that I had been to before several years ago, but had kind of forgotten this nuance to their fire extinguishers. They're all mounted very low on the floor, like a child could open them and grab that and carry it.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is a bad thing. It's just something to be aware of, that in a lot of commercial industrial settings, they're kind of like hip height of an adult person. For whatever reason, their cabinets and cutouts were lower. And it's not a bad thing, it's just something to be aware of. And it's something that I just, kind of came to my mind of like, oh yeah, they're not quite on your normal where you would expect them to be eye line. They're slightly lower.
Yeah, for sure. With talking about having people in different parts of the ministry, whether that's the parking team or the ushers, be integrated into the safety ministry, that might sound like everybody's got to be a trained security professional.
It would help being someone who has field experience as a professional security officer that's been in a couple of roles and worked at a variety of facilities. Definitely helps. It for sure cuts the learning curve for people that don't do that professionally. But generally the people that we're working with as volunteers, they're not professionals. So it definitely helps, but those people don't necessarily need to see themselves as a security professional. I think professionalism, like conducting yourself professionally, is very helpful and like should be something the team is striving for. But seeing themselves or like worrying about necessarily seeking credentials, it isn't necessary, depending on the scenario.
But they don't need, my thought here is they don't really need a high level of training to be helpful.
True. Yeah. They need awareness. They need that mindset. And then they need, like, when we start talking about hierarchy, I always think of like mindset, tactics, skill, gear. A lot of times, because of the industry we're in, the businesses we worked for, like, we dealt a lot with gear, but it was important to reset a student's perspective that those other things were more important.
Yeah.
And so, like, having, if we have the opportunity to train or just expose and just have conversations with those other volunteers that are not necessarily a part of the intervention side of the safety ministry, but are just like a part of our intelligence gathering, or just part of our perimeter and our awareness, they don't need to see themselves as some G.I. Joe. They simply need to be able to read the baseline, know when something is not abiding to that baseline and it's not normal, and then they need to know what to do with that instinct. So ideally, that's if they're on a radio system, like use the radio appropriately to make an appropriate description, or in smaller churches, we've been in smaller churches where it's simply just like walk over and have a conversation with someone.
Yeah.
Especially if you don't feel comfortable engaging with that subject, go find the pastor, go find a safety ministry member, go find whoever that is in your congregation, go have that conversation. Hey, I've seen this person, and maybe we can turn and see that person, kind of casually give a description. Hey, can you see this person over my shoulder right now? Their vibe is off, or like be able to enunciate like what is odd or off about them,
or even,
and then let them take it from there.
Even as little as they get on a radio or tell somebody like, hey, go get Paul, there's a weird guy in the lobby. You as a professional will probably walk out and be like,
yeah. Or if I'm already monitoring that radio channel, I'm like, cool, someone might be on the way to come look for me, like, hey, bring me over to this scenario. But I may have already heard that, and I started walking down the hallway already. I'm like, oh, okay, let's do this.
Yeah. I think that's an excellent point. If somebody's involved in a church in some capacity that makes decisions, what do you think about having a volunteer safety team? Obviously, having elements of that are really important, but like relying heavily on volunteers versus having paid professional security staff.
In my experience, it can be helpful to have both. You absolutely can do it simply by paying armed security is what I would encourage. Armed security to be there. It is difficult, and I think both you and I have worked in a capacity where we showed up and had no idea what the baseline was, and I'm having to figure it out on the fly. And especially if I'm a team of one, it depends on the size of the congregation and the building we're dealing with. Like, I don't know that I'll be able to position myself in the right place to be in the right space at the right time to do what needs to be done. I definitely think that a lower cost option, it certainly is going to cost you something as an administrator, as a decision maker. It's going to cost you something to have a volunteer team, because that team needs to be resourced and needs to have the opportunity to have access to the building and train. And they need to have at least the opportunity to formulate a plan, whether we call that it's a legit written protocol or it's something that they've talked together and it's a very small team that they've intimately talked through a scenario or worked through several scenarios together. There is an opportunity at a lower cost to simply have well-trained volunteers. A lot of the churches that I've worked at, it's a complement of, we have trained professional responders that have been vetted, especially when it comes to violent intervention. Having an element to your team or a paid complement to the volunteer team who knows the congregation, who knows the building intimately, who knows the people there, like knows the baseline, is, I think, the way to do it. I would say that it can be done well. All three of those options, but almost always you'll be best served by a hybrid option.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. The best iteration of that is going to be a hybrid, because you can speak to this too. We've both worked in a paid armed capacity at houses of worship. I know for myself, the first thing I do when I'm getting there, other than walking around and observing the building, is I'm making friends with the ushers, the administrators, the people who serve the coffee.
Yeah, absolutely. because I need a coffee, and because those people have their finger on the pulse of what's going on.
Right. So if you can have a consistent paid team where it's the same armed guys every week that have a good relationship with a consistent volunteer safety ministry, boy, you've really got a serious challenge to anything that would come up.
Yes.
Anything. Whether that's fire, medical, whatever.
Yeah, and the teams need to have a working knowledge to be able to work together. A lot of times on the paid side, they look at us as like, we're there if someone comes to do violence to their congregation. And I mean, that is why we're there. But that also, and for sure, I can speak for myself, like that doesn't mean that I won't get involved if someone needs medical treatment. Even just a basic assessment of like, oh, this doesn't feel right, or this person's in pain. Like, okay, what's going on? What resources does the church have that we can start to utilize? Maybe there are medical professionals already in the congregation. I work at churches that there's an ambulance parked in the parking lot because the ambulance crew that's on duty that day is attending church there. So like we might already have that advantage, but if we don't, there may be times where we may even still call 911 if that was true, just to make sure that the ball is rolling and we have all the resources that we need to take care of that person. But for sure, like it's the same way. Like we may have some fire extinguishers and some other firefighting gear, or maybe there are firefighters in your congregation already. Doesn't matter how large or small. Very likely there is an EMT, a paramedic, and a firefighter, whether that's a paid or volunteer,
especially
already in your congregation.
If you're in Lancaster County,
for sure.
We have great volunteers around here, in my estimation.
Yeah, and we've interacted with them.
Yeah,
several times. So like maybe you just like all you need to do is let that person come over and start doing their thing because they already have a grasp of what needs to be done.
Yeah.
And you were just the person who like needed to project calm, begin the communication process, let the resources come to you.
That's it.
Does that answer it? Okay.
Yeah. No, those are some really good thoughts. Again, if you're someone who's in a decision-making capacity, you're hiring armed security, you should just hire cops, right?
No. Hot take. And again, in fairness, what relevant experience does that police officer have that is going to assist you in protecting your congregation?
Yeah.
It's not that police officers couldn't have relevant experience, but generally their day-to-day, like if they're in a patrol function, generally their day-to-day is like responding to someone that already is in the middle of an active emergency. So if they find themselves working a fixed site security detail, it's a lot of boredom. It's a lot of trying to keep yourself sharp and trying to stay engaged when there is nothing going on. I guess it depends on how busy their department is, but they may just all day long run between call to call to call. And they also have a radio that connects them to at least their department, maybe the county-wide system, maybe several other bordering departments that would come and assist them if they get into a serious fight, or a serious car chase or whatever that is. Civilian security officers do not have that. I mean, I might be able to get on a cell phone and call for police assistance, but it might be 15, 20 minutes until I have an officer there. And that's if I could accurately get a description of where I am, what is, and be able to describe what is going on and I need assistance right now.
Yeah.
It depends on what else is going on in that call district. So I'm not saying you should not hire police officers. Especially hiring or bringing in a uniformed police officer presence, especially like in a lobby very visually. Some people might argue you have some visual deterrence, and I wouldn't disagree with that.
That can be a benefit depending on your situation.
However, not every congregation is going to respond well to that. And you need to message it to the congregation in a responsible, caring manner, if that's what you're choosing to do. But that also, having a uniformed police officer there doesn't necessarily mitigate the things that we're already talking about. Again, let's just like set aside the violent reaction to an active shooting or some kind of active attack for a moment. What is that police officer prepared to do? What kind of relevant experience do they have in searching for a lost child? Maybe they've been called to that kind of stuff before, but have they had to like, okay, secure the building and room by room lead a search or lead, another group of staff in trying to search for this child? Like, what kinds of experience do they have in medical? I have been on emergency scenes where police officers have started investigating something before we've even dealt with the medical emergency that's going on right in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
And whether that's their experience, like they're just beginning to work their normal process, that's okay, or it's understandable. Or they didn't feel resourced enough. They didn't feel like they knew what to be doing, so they didn't step into that role. But for sure, we need to make sure if you are hiring police officers that they have a relevant space to play. And we also know that there is a time, even if we have a uniformed police officer on the campus at the time, there may be several different scenarios, especially in a church where people have had traumatic experiences. They may be sharing very intimate details with someone on the prayer team, with a pastor, with anyone who's engaged with them, that it would be inappropriate or it would be detrimental to the process to suddenly have a uniformed police officer even just walk by that conversation, let alone casually walk into and begin to monitor that conversation from, a place close by in the lobby.
Mm-hmm.
So we should have that decision maker should consider there are definitely going to be scenarios where that uniformed police officer is not the right thing to be integrating to get the results that you want. So what's your plan then for the other? That's I think is the point I'm getting to. Like, what's your plan for those other types of emergencies or those other scenarios?
Yeah. So I think that would be the case to have, depending on the size and needs of your organization, a security director that's experienced in security operations that can make those decisions based on people's actual competency and their relevance to the job.
Yes, I would agree.
Yeah. Training for church security people.
Okay.
What should be, outside of stuff that might be offered through the organization or skills that they already bring to the table? What would be something that anybody who's interested in this kind of topic that's at any level involved with the safety ministry could pursue that would increase their capability as part of that?
I think it's hard to assume that any person is bringing any level of skill with them. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think that decision maker should assume that you're dealing with people who are well-intentioned, because you do need to assess that before you bring someone into that ministry.
Mm-hmm.
You need to assess their intentions, their motivations. But I think we should consider that they may be walking in with no other relevant experience. Maybe a good example. We may be able to recruit someone who already is working, say, in a steel factory, and they already are a part of the response team at that steel factory. So they may have some additional medical experience. They may have some firefighting experience or like exposure. They may, if they work in a healthcare facility, they may have like understanding of like how do we protect against bloodborne pathogens and those kinds of things. Like, if we can recruit or identify those people in our congregation and try and bring them into our ministry, like, great.
Yeah, that's super helpful, and you can really lean on that.
But we should also consider they may not have those things. How do we get us closer to what we want?
Yeah.
I think something to start with, like, aside from like some of those workplace things that you don't realize it, but like even people who work in retail have something they're required to go through every year from their HR process. It may not be the best training, but it may be something that clicks and they have the right instincts at the right time. So don't count that out. But what should we do to be complementing that? I think one of the best things that can be offered both to a safety ministry or to the congregation in general is stop the bleed training. And again, very likely there's someone already in the congregation that could be putting that on for the safety ministry, or is already on the safety ministry, a part of it. That could be putting on those classes, and it could be as small as 5 people, or if you had the resources to teach a congregation of 500, like get everyone in a room and just like give them a 45-minute like, here's how to stop someone from bleeding to death, and like these are some basic components, like these are some pieces of equipment that are already within the environment that are at your disposal.
Yeah, if you could get, I would say the majority of even people in your congregation stop the bleed, CPR, AED certified, man.
Yeah. And for sure, like if we could do that, a robust first aid course. Again, even myself, I've had points in my life where I've done some first aid, um, but then I'm out of practice for a long time. Like other than putting a band-aid on myself, like it's easy to get out of practice. But at least if they've had some opportunity to be exposed to the right decision-making process, and they know where the resources are. Sometimes that's enough to get the momentum rolling to caring for someone in the right way. And definitely, like your organization, if they don't already have an AED, like should have that. That's one of the most common emergencies anywhere in public. You'll see them at malls and in airports and things like that. Like your church should have an AED. At the very least, you decide like I don't know what is going on with this person medically. They're not responding to me, or I'm not able to make a really good assessment. It might be enough that we just put the pads on the patient and let the machine start to be able to read the rhythm and decide like is this something that we can take an interventional step with using an AED. And like the AEDs now that are being produced, like you don't need to have any training really. It would be nice to have some orientation to the machine, but like you don't really, like if you're smart enough to open up the box and press the on button, it's going to tell you what to do.
And they're
There's
getting
gonna be
smaller and
pictures
they're
that-
getting cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no reason that an organization
We've
of
been
any
at
size shouldn't have
fitness facilities that have them.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Again, athletic facilities. We've seen in the sports world in the last few years, like cardiac events, even in what we thought was normally healthy people, that if somebody again knew the right decision-making process and immediately started applying the machine so they can read the rhythm, and if it was appropriate, apply a shock to that person to restart the heart, or to get us back into a proper rhythm, like great. Those things are like easy things to start with. I think then like having if you had the opportunity to have someone come out and do a comprehensive site survey for you, like they're looking at your lighting, they're looking at your emergency exits, they're looking at your like your stairways, your ramps, any kind of like landscaping that you have, shadows, like any kind of nuance. Like if you could have someone come out and really do a vulnerability assessment, like that would help. Again, even if you're not a professional, having someone come out who has that knowledge that can give you some idea of like where should we start working on these vulnerabilities. Dude, make sure that every guy on the safety ministry has a good quality flashlight in his pocket. And I'd love for them to have a good quality tourniquet.
Yeah, man, because like power goes out and you have a sanctuary full of people.
Almost, I can tell you, like, out of that list of 7 to 10 emergencies that we had talked through, like, there would be a reason that you would want your flashlight in all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like, start there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good intro to training for whether it's a volunteer or a paid security professional. If you want to get into the firearm side, obviously we've kind of downplayed that because a lot of the people that would be watching this would be more firearms oriented, but I've done kind of some of this other stuff. I've got my Stop the Bleed training. Maybe I have some basic understanding of awareness and security stuff. How do I look at firearms training as a security professional or volunteer?
I would say before we jump all the way to firearms, because like lethal force engagement, I would say like what was our opportunity, or have we explored? It's less comfortable, and it's sometimes it might be harder to pull off, or it might be you might have to do some more digging, but like have we done any like realistic scenario based training? Have we had the opportunity to work through de-escalating a situation or using like any number of like hands-on techniques before we consider? I would also then would want the opportunity to have had used applied pepper spray or whatever your chosen less lethal option is, even before I would consider firearms training. Like, maybe you probably should be doing those things first. But if we then have to get into firearms training, I would say generally for the concealed carry citizen, it's the same. It doesn't really matter if you're working as a part of the safety ministry or not, or if you're a professional or not, like a paid professional or not. Let's say we could start with whatever a normal person, a reasonable person should have to be responsibly carrying a gun in public with them all the time. You're not changing any of the, if an instructor has set a set of standards for that, where they can enunciate like what's the mindset, tactics, skill, and gear that we think the minimums are, or what we think we should be working towards. Really, they're not going to change much if you're working in a safety ministry. I would say, especially in a professional setting, my experience is the larger the congregation, the larger the facility, the farther, when we talk about a shooting problem, the farther you need to be able to shoot your handgun accurately.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think like a red dot pistol is king. There are facilities that I've worked at that you may have an open long distance shot, say 50 or 100 yards. Can you make a headshot that long? I mean, like realistically, you should ask you should ask yourself, like, let's start with something simpler. Go to your place of worship, or when you're there on Sunday or whatever day you worship, whatever activity you're there for. The next time you're there, try and find the longest hallway or the longest distance between, say, the main entrance door and wherever the farthest distance you can walk down the kids' hallway, or down to the farthest part in the lobby, or all the way to the bathrooms, or something like that, and just estimate that for yourself. If you can range that out or pace that out, like, great. But then say, like, okay, like if I needed to make that shot, what is my skill set right now?
Mm-hmm.
And be honest with your instructor when you are taking professional training. Be honest with your instructor of like, hey, just like we've told students, like, what's the farthest shot you'd have to take in your house? I sometimes ask students, what's the farthest shot you'd have to take down your driveway?
Yeah.
Let's start there. Like, even before we start talking about the specifics, a competition shooter may know that he needs to be able to shoot 25 yards. Housewife may say, yeah, if I can run a target down the range, she's like, yeah, that's about the distance between the living room and the kitchen. Cool, that's all I need. I don't care if she knows that's 15 feet.
Yeah. What's the distance
or
from the
15
front,
yards.
What's the distance from the front to back of your car?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we can start there. What's your skill set right now? And realistically, like, what is the size of the target we need to be able to hit effectively under pressure?
Yeah.
I would suggest, or like, again, like if we had to like generalize it for someone, like, can you shoot a 3x5 index card at 25 yards? If you can't, like, okay, let's start with that. And again, like, that's a decent idea for a responsibly armed citizen, not necessarily someone who is like has volunteered or is professionally being thrust into the role of security.
Yeah, I laughed about that. Not that that's an unrealistic standard. I think that's a very reasonable standard. But if you've been to any public shooting range in America, you'll be aware that I would venture to say most people can't do that.
I guess, yeah. I mean, I would say that that's a fair assessment. I would hope that our students are well better off.
Yeah, for sure.
Much closer to that standard.
If they're not, I'll tell them.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's a hard part as an instructor, is like setting a standard that's both realistic and reachable
and achievable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point as far as...
But have that conversation with your instructor.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point as far as the actual skill component of it. I think it was really interesting that when I asked the question, you were like, before you even get into the skills part, like, do some scenario-based training. I think that is a huge lack, whether it's, you know, regular armed citizen going about their day, just decided to get a handgun for self-defense, or somebody in one of these safety or security roles. I think that is a huge lack for most people doing those things.
I think I can explain a little bit why. It takes a huge check on your ego. A lot of scenario-based training, if it's done the right way, and I can tell you from the instructor side, like what's the hard part is like creating a script and like coaching role players about how to react to the students we're going to inject into the scenario, and like what we want them to be doing, and like what their right and left limits are, what their guidelines are.
Yeah.
And the other from the instructor perspective, why does it not occur a ton? It can be expensive because of the cost of that preparation, and of the materials that we're going to be using, things that we're going to use up or may damage or things like that. Additional costs, cleanup. But in addition to that, the safety perspective of like, if we get this wrong, and you and I, we could talk about factually that we know scenarios have gone wrong. It's a known fact for police departments where like people have accidentally shot another officer they were training with, thinking that they had one type of tool in their holster and they didn't, or it was loaded improperly, or like the safety protocols failed. And that's something that's really been heavy on me, and is a reason that I haven't done a lot of scenario-based training with clients, is the level of like preparation and the time and effort it's going to take to do a thorough scenario-based training, and like just like the basic, and we don't have to get into the specifics, but like the details of checking to make sure that we know what every person is carrying into that scenario, and we already know what's laying in that environment, and that we've sanitized that, or that we've cleaned that, we've checked that, whatever that is. That takes a lot of skill. It takes skill, and it takes time and effort,
and money, frankly.
Yeah, and that also means that like generally, especially, and we would encourage that safety ministry to be training in the building in which they're going to be acting, if that's possible, if at all possible.
Mm-hmm.
But that also means that they need unfettered, they need, no one else can be accessing the building while they're running that scenario.
Yeah.
And that makes it really hard for, especially for a church, that like Susie can't stop by and borrow a chair, or like a staff member can't. It would be inappropriate to allow a staff member to come in and walk through a scenario, even to grab something from their office.
Yeah.
And I know, like, that would be delicate. Like, you need to deal with it in a delicate manner, and you need to like have a protocol that can manage that. But we like, for safety's sake, we can't have someone who's not actively participating in that scenario like walk into that drill or be in that space.
Yeah.
And we need to have things already in place, and we need other organizations, like maybe the local police department does need to know that we're conducting that level of training.
Absolutely.
If someone drove by our facility and either saw through the window or saw people in the parking lot in, heavy, thick clothing with masks on and what appears to be firearms or some other kinds of weapons preparing to go in or whatever, you could easily take that out of context and simply make an emergency call and say, "Hey, I'm seeing this." A good citizen should be suspicious enough that maybe they do make a call. And we cannot have police officers arriving on a scene where we're conducting a drill and people are really role-playing live with maybe what looks to be a firearm, which, if we've done all of our ethical standards, like, is not, and mm-hmm. is, we've established a protocol, but like, if suddenly an armed police officer shows up and they don't know that, they've just brought live firearms into that scenario that could hurt someone, and they don't know that everyone else is participating in the drill.
Yeah, setting up that type of training, as you said, has a lot of challenges to overcome.
It is very valuable. But it takes a lot of effort. And I think that's why it's not done a lot, or maybe it's not always done well.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, we've seen it done
and
poorly.
and why,
for sure.
like, again, okay, then like flip out of our instructor role and look at, like, from a student who's been in a class, why was I hesitant initially? Like, there is some painless stimulus related to like being shot with an object, like, and if we're just talking shooting, because there's lots of role playing that would not necessarily include firearms, or that may not always be the answer to the problem. It shouldn't be if you're setting up good scenario based training, but it's intimidating. And even after being through it a couple of times now, like, I can tell students, like, go into it with the mindset of like, there isn't necessarily I'm winning this by doing these steps. You're gonna have to get in there, make a solid assessment of like, what the heck is going on, what do I need to be doing, and your role as a responsibly armed citizen by yourself, or your role as that protector with your family, or that protector that's being hired to be there, can be different. And so how you play out that scenario and how your role players react to that, super critical to making sure you get the right object lessons there. But like, it's hard to do. It's intimidating.
Yeah.
And a lot of students do not avail of themselves of that opportunity, which we as professionals would absolutely tell you that you should be, once you've gotten some basic safety understanding and like whatever manipulations of the system would be required to participate, you should definitely be involved in scenario-based training, or what we would call force on force.
Yeah, I would say as early on in your training journey as you can safely participate in that type of training, you should. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It will then help you reinforce why you might seek additional training in certain areas or invest in certain equipment. It will definitely help shape the things you invest in going forward, that experience.
Yeah, I can definitely say from my experience taking that type of training, I had ideas going into it about how I would handle situations, and it's like, oh boy, that didn't work at all.
Right. And I think just getting a student to admit that is maybe would be the whole point of just saying like, oh, it didn't work how I thought it would. Maybe like, not that you made the wrong decision, just like the bad guy gets a say too. And he is a human being that is creative and has motivations and like is thinking and moving at the same time you are. It's not just a paper target being hung out there to like, for you to show us like what your groups look like.
I think the most important thing about that type of training is it strips away title, experience, like none of that stuff matters. It's just how do you interact.
It's how you can perform. It's not that experience wouldn't help you, but it does. Like, you're building, every person that participates is building experience. You're experiencing those adrenaline like rushes and crashes, you know, as you go in and out of scenarios, and then you're being debriefed and then working through the next one. You've had that, oh my gosh, here we go, a couple of times, and that can, even in itself, can be helpful, of like, you know what that rush is going to feel like, you know what kinds of like physiological symptoms you're going to have or experience yourself, and so you may be less apt to panic or for those to like get out of your control if you are then at some point tested, like for real. That's valuable. A person who's been through some of that before then is starting to be able to enact some techniques that might assist them in a scenario, but it ultimately comes down to like, what can you do at the time?
Yeah.
You shouldn't be able to call an alibi. You can't, you aren't necessarily, unless that's part of the scenario, like calling for backup. Like, it's like, what can you do to affect the best possible outcome for yourself or the people that you're required to protect?
Absolutely. For sure. Wow, we really covered a lot. Yeah, I don't have any other specific questions about that type of training. Obviously it's extraordinarily valuable. What final thoughts on church security teams, safety ministries?
Anything that you do and start working on now is better than like what you had last weekend. So, you know, churches can start small and begin like incrementally stepping their way. You should establish what your ideal end state is so that you can start to reverse engineer like what it's going to take to get you there. And it may be that you change your goal as you start working, but set a goal for the team or for that ministry. Especially, and like establish that goal is incorporated into that ministry part. Like, how are they going to assist, or like, what is their role in making sure that the rest of the ministry is doing what they need to be doing? And make sure that the people you bring onto that team and that you give that trust to are respectful of that, and that you're resourcing them in a way that helps them help you if you're that decision maker.
Yeah, that's ultimately the most important thing, is holding that highest ideal of how do we empower the church to do its mission.
Yeah, and then just begin taking small steps, like as the budget allows, as like time and interest allows. For sure, you don't need to start setting a firearms policy before you've talked about like what are we doing in our kids ministry to reunite parents and kids if there's a fire. You know, like that's a much harder problem to solve, to be honest with you. Like from a firearms instructor's perspective, or someone who is a professional security officer and is prepared to do violence because someone has brought violence to us. A shooting battle, like, doesn't matter geometry, like how you lay it out, is a relatively, like, once rounds start going both ways, that's a relatively simple problem. Like, we need to win because we'll die if we don't. The other types of emergencies we're dealing with, like, yes, we can fight a fire. Like, if we can identify where the fire is, how large it is, and things like that, like, we can fight it like in a physical sense. But then we also have some responsibility of like, okay, we have a lot of moving parts at that point. We can't freeze things in place. We need to be moving some people away from danger. We may be sending some people into danger to intervene, or to simply delay while we do that evacuation. And then we need to like, what's our plan to deal with the fallout afterwards?
Yeah.
I think is as much a part of the safety ministry as who's ready to do something if someone rams their car through the front door.
Yeah, both on an individual and institutional level, that pre and post planning, super important.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right, I think we'll wrap it up. Maybe we'll reconvene here in the cistern next week. All right.